Form your LLC in Wyoming for privacy, Delaware for prestige, or just your home state to keep it simple. I'll tell you what, if you pick wrong, you're going to pay extra and get less protection. In this video, I'm going to end the debate quick. All right, let's get started. Okay, so investors, hear this. Wyoming's for privacy and Delaware is for big companies, but most portfolios aren't venture-backed startups. So if you own rentals or you're small to mid-sized business, then the right choice depends on privacy, cost, charging order protections, and where you're actually operating. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to put together Wyoming versus Delaware versus your home state side by side and give you a 30-second decision rule that you can use in building out your overall plan. All right, so what are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at privacy to determine, how much information about you and your business is going to be made public with that filing. We're going to look at annual costs and franchise taxes because those are things many times that people are not aware of that sneak in and can create problems for them down the road. Charging order protections. Listen, if you're going to the trouble of setting up a business entity, one of the reasons why you're doing this is because you want to make sure you won't be sued personally, or if you do get sued personally for your business, you're not going to lose your business. So that's very important. And then the other thing is, where do you conduct your business? All right, that's always going to play into this in the analysis because where you're conducting business will dictate where that entity needs to be registered. And then, of course, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is your capital plans. All this is going to be layered in so you get a greater sense of which state you should be creating your business in. All right, so what are we talking about here? So let's just start talking about privacy. Now, when it comes to privacy, all right, how do these states stack up? Well, in Wyoming, what you have is complete privacy on the public record. This is really strong because when you file an LLC in Wyoming, Wyoming is not collecting any information on the members or managers. All you have to provide to the state of Wyoming is the name of the entity, the registered agent, and the person's information who is submitting the articles for acceptance by the state. So privacy is really strong there in Wyoming. Now, our partner state over there, Delaware, same thing, strong privacy. So in Delaware, it's very similar to Wyoming in that they do not collect any information on the public filings that are made to set up your entity, to set it up. Now, your home state, all right, this is where we run into issues here. So in your home state, man, it's a gamble, all right? Most states require that you list, okay, either managers or members of the LLC and their address, their home address. So here's the thing. If I was setting up a limited liability company in Florida, then I would need to list, and annually the report's going to capture the names and addresses of the members or managers. So if you're considering setting up a limited liability company and you want privacy, then this issue right up here, the home state one, can create a problem for you. But there is a solution to that, and I can show you that a little bit later. But just generally speaking, when you set it up, be aware of this issue. Now, the one thing I will bring up about privacy, which I think is important to identify, is that when it comes to privacy, if the business is one in which it's about you. So, I work for a company. I founded this company, Anderson Business Advisors, with my partner, Toby Mathis. You've seen tons of videos with me talking about that. So to set up a firm with complete anonymity, for me, doesn't make a lot of sense because I share that information with people. On the other hand, if you're not building the business on your personality or associating it back to you, well, then maybe if you do have an active business, you may want some privacy for that. So this is one of the areas in which I tell people all the time when we're consulting with them that if you're setting up an LLC for an active business and it's going to be somehow tied to your personality, then the anonymity or privacy aspect may not be high on your list of things that matter the most with that business. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so that's one. Now, how about annual costs? Let's look at the cost factor here of these various states. So Wyoming, really low, $60 to get that entity set up. Now you can see why this is an attractive target or attractive state for individuals is the fact that you can set it up there and it's not very expensive. Now Delaware, well, they are a little more expensive if you want to go into that state. Now a lot of that's based upon their courts, and I'll explain that a little later. So in Delaware, that's going to hit you with $300 to set up your entity and on an ongoing basis. So that can be expensive. Now, other states, your home state, well, you just have to look online. There are some states that are inexpensive. New Mexico, I believe it's $50. You go all the way up to California. So you have anywhere from $50 to $800 for your entity to set it up. And then on top of that, you have to be aware of the fact that some states also charge a franchise tax for that entity. So not only are you paying an annual fee, but you're also paying an annual franchise tax, such as Tennessee, Texas, Delaware even has a tax as well. So depending on what type of business you're engaged in and where you're conducting that business, it's not just the annual fee you need to be aware of, you also need to be aware of that franchise tax. Okay, so the next issue I want to look at is charging order protections. So let's just call this protections, okay, for these various states. Now, the thing that we're looking for when we set up an entity is not just the entity protecting me personally from what goes on inside of the entity. So I often refer to this as what happens in the box stays in the box, that type of protection. That's pretty much uniform across all 50 states, as long as you don't screw up your box. Now, what's not uniform and should be on your radar screen if you're setting up an LLC is what happens outside of the box. And what I'm implying is that if you have an LLC right here and you're over here and somebody sues you personally, that is an outside of the box issue, meaning you are the one who is being sued. And if a judgment is entered against you, then that judgment runs the risk that the creditor could then take your LLC and any assets that are held inside of it. Now, the way we fight back against that and stop creditors from taking our clients' LLCs from them is we're very strategic in our planning to ensure that we're using LLCs, that is our members or our clients are only members in an LLC that has strong charging order protections, even for single member LLCs. And so what does that mean? That means that a creditor cannot take your LLC from you. That's it. They can't get it from you. They can't control it. You're in control of your LLC. You own your LLC. That judgment just hangs around out there and eventually will dissipate. So which states offer this level of protection, this ultimate platinum, actually let's call it titanium level of protection? Well, it's definitely Wyoming. This is super strong here. Okay, the charging order that I just described is the sole and exclusive remedy. Now, Delaware, they don't want to be left out on this one, so they have a similar statute as well. They're strong. But the problem with Delaware is that they have courts of chancery that are in charge of determining business disputes. And sometimes we've seen with these courts recently now that they've kind of pulled back from the initial attraction of Delaware, which was anonymity and asset protection. So I think there's some risk there that or uncertainty. Let me put it to a better way. But Delaware is still strong, and if you're raising capital, that's the place you're going to go for sure to put those deals together. Now, your home state, it varies on the levels of protection. You know, a lot of states allow a creditor, like I just showed you, to take your LLC. That's called a foreclosure. California is notable for this. Texas used to be a great state. They don't allow someone to foreclose and take a Texas LLC, but now they're allowing the court will award the creditor essentially a special master, or somebody will sit on the management board with the owners of the LLC to kind of oversee what they're doing with the company to make sure that they're not moving assets beyond the reach of a creditor, somehow impairing the company's ability to pay out the members' debts. So what I'm saying there is, hey, what used to be good can easily become bad if you don't have a state and the legal system behind you to make sure that they're keeping the strength up to par. And that's where Wyoming has really shined. Now, do you have to foreign file, or where do you operate? This is the reality of the situation here. So if you're using any of these states, whatever you're conducting your business, okay, even if you formed it in Wyoming or Delaware, if you're conducting an active business, let's say in Minnesota, and you started with a Delaware entity, then that Delaware entity will need to file in Minnesota as a foreign entity. All right, so foreign qualification is something that applies across the board. It doesn't matter where you set it up. You can't operate your business, your active business, in Minnesota out of a Delaware LLC. That Delaware LLC must be filed there. So when you're setting up these entities, this is something we have to be looking at is where are you conducting business and how does that business look overall as far as the structuring is concerned. Okay, so what are the use case scenarios? When do you use one versus the other? Well, let me just get some more space here and I'll show you. So Wyoming. When would I use Wyoming? When do we use Wyoming for our clients? Listen, we use this in the situations. If you want maximum privacy, so if you want privacy for your business or for your existing LLCs, we're going to go with Wyoming. And we're going to create a simple holding company, which means we create the Wyoming LLC right here, and then we create that Minnesota LLC right up here that's owned by your Wyoming limited liability company. We do this for rental real estate investors. We do this for small business owners who desire privacy. Now, if you want low cost, okay, then Wyoming is going to be your friend. All right. And if you're concerned about single member LLC protection, meaning, hey, it's just me as the sole member, because there's a lot of states out there that do not recognize single member LLC protections, then if you want single member LLC protections, if it's just you, definitely want to go there. Because Wyoming statute specifically references a single member LLC and stating that the charging order protections that I just shared with you briefly apply to single member LLCs. Okay, so what about Delaware? When do we look at using Delaware in our planning? Well, Delaware is going to be there if you want to go out there and I would tell you raise capital. So this is for the capital raise, okay? So people like, say, Grant Cardone, who's out there raising money for his next deal. Delaware's probably on his radar screen. The other thing about Delaware, which makes it unique, is if you're going to be putting together larger deals, then you would look at Delaware. And what I mean by larger deals, 10 mil plus with financing. So when a couple of the deals that we've worked on here, my partner and I, on our own real estate investing, we had to set up in Delaware because the financing component required, because of the size of the financing, that we actually use Delaware. Originally, I wanted to use Wyoming. This was several years ago, and they said, nope, we won't touch it. We want Delaware. Why do they want Delaware? Well, those chancery courts, that is what they're probably looking for, because they want to make sure that if something goes wrong, they can go in and there's greater scrutiny applied to the managers of the LLC and the decisions that they made vis-a-vis how does that creditor get paid. And the other thing about Delaware, hey, if you're fine with the $300, then of course you're going to go there. It's going to have a higher fee and an annual tax. But at the end of the day, it does bring a certain prestige to what it is you're doing. And that's why we will recommend in certain situations, people choose Delaware for their registration. Now, when do you use your home state? Well, your home state is going to be set up typically when you're conducting business in that individual state. So you're going to need to register there anyway. So for example, if you hold real estate, okay, that means you're going to be creating a home state LLC or conducting an active business, like I shared with you earlier. So in this example with the Minnesota one up top, if I had a Minnesota rental, then this is how I would structure that deal. Minnesota rental into a Minnesota LLC owned by a Wyoming LLC. Now let's assume it's not that. Let's instead say I'm running a nightclub and I don't want people to know that I'm the owner of the nightclub. Well, then I would create an LLC in Minnesota right here owned by the Wyoming LLC. Therefore, if somebody looks at the nightclub, they don't see Clint as the owner of that club. So that would be a perfect example of where you would be using privacy again. Now, if privacy is not a concern, well, then, of course, you don't even need any of this, and you could just be the sole owner of this LLC set up in Minnesota for your nightclub. So that's how we would go about creating these. And so what I just shared with you was a strategy, if you just recall this, with the blue box and the orange box there, or the red box. That is a two-entity stack structure, okay? It's a holdco plus an in-state LLC. And what it really does for you, if you go down this path, is it gives you the best of both worlds, right? You get the in-state component that's required. You're not having to register the Wyoming LLC in the state where the business up here is taking place, because the Wyoming LLC isn't doing any business in Minnesota. All it's doing is owning an interest in a Minnesota limited liability company. And so this preserves your protections, keeps your costs low, gives you privacy. It gives you a lot of benefits. And if you're setting up an LLC, this is what I would do. This is the way I would break it down. If you just want the privacy and the simple holding structure and asset protection, go with Wyoming. It's cheap, strong. it's the way to go. We set up thousands of these every year for our investor clients and our business owner clients. Now, Delaware, if you're serious about raising capital, it's not something we do here. We don't help people set up entities to raise capital, but I'm going to recommend you set up Delaware if you're doing a larger deal. If you're taking down something such as a multi-unit, a 200-unit apartment complex or commercial property, and you're getting over 10 million, then you're going to set up Delaware. So what would that look like? Typically what happens there, from personal experience, you create a Delaware LLC here, and you may need to create a Delaware LLC up here for the asset, plus foreign file it, like we talked about earlier, in the state where the asset's located. That's driven by your lender. But generally speaking, you're going to see this in your structure. All right, and then if you're doing the rental properties, again, we already went through that on how you would set that up with the whole the holding company there. So listen, when it comes down to it, it's this. Forming in the wrong state can mean double fees and weaker protection than you might be looking for. And so if you want privacy, if you want structures that stays compliant where you operate, I suggest you do this. Book a strategy session with someone here at Anderson. We work in all 50 states. I have a team of professionals that can help you set up your structure, that make sure you're taking advantage of all the benefits that I just laid out for you, so you're getting ahead of it. We see people all the time that come to us and they say, man, I wish I would have had this information 6 months ago, 5 years ago, before I put my plan in place, because the guy I'm working with, well, he just didn't tell me about any of this. Unfortunately, sometimes it's too late. Once you've rung that bell, we can't unring it. But if you're looking at setting up a new structure, there are things you should be putting in place now. We can definitely help you do that. And if you do have something you've already created, let us take a look. We do have other strategies, I didn't go into them here, that can help you take what's already out there and protect it with an anonymity shield. Keep your name off the public record legally. Guys, to take advantage of that, again, go to the show notes, click on the strategy session link, and if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you know anybody that's looking to set up an LLC, share it with them. Let them know, hey, here are some of the options you have when it comes to creating your company. All right, take care.